So, one thing that my dad mentioned in class today, or yesterday rather, was that holiness, the same root word for holiness is the same root word for wholeness. And wholeness is my jam. All right, homies, let's go. Whew. Welcome to the Cost of Curiosity. Today, we are exploring everyone's most favorite topic holiness. Cool. All right, this is how my day started. So, I woke up yesterday, um, and I normally don't get right on social media, but Thursdays I don't work. So I sleep in a little bit and I indulge with apparently going on social media immediately. And this video popped up of this girl talking about this verse that was added in later on into the Bible. And it was Mark 7:19. And she was talking about how pigs, it was about pigs. And it was about how she believed that like we weren't really still supposed to eat pigs. And she's going through all these different scenarios. I'm caught on they are adding verses later on, right? So that brings me through like a hysteria. Like, what other verses did they add on later? Like freaking out. But she was just saying wild stuff. Like, and this may be true. I did not look into it at all. I was just like, I have to move on with my life. But she was talking about like swine, still bad, still shouldn't eat it. Parasites, there's a ton of parasites in swine. Parasites in her mind are demons, right? And then like demons possessed pigs, whatever. Went through a whole thing. It was entertaining. I didn't even finish watching the video. I was like, I gotta start my day. So, um, go on to my theology class that is taught by my father, and it's funny because well, it's not funny, but he just had a heart attack last week. I talked about it on the last episode, and one of the main contributors was bacon, right? So while I'm watching this video, I'm thinking about my dad, and I'm like, I don't think I'm gonna eat bacon. Like, I don't think I'm gonna eat pork anymore. Like, I don't know if this girl is talking any type of nonsense or truth at all, but just like, my sister doesn't eat pork. Like, it's probably not the healthiest for me. Like, there probably are a lot of parasites in it. They're really smart animals, but like they are kind of gross, right? So, so we start off the class talking about that. Like he's like, "Yeah, I have to cut back on my bacon," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm not eating bacon anymore." Like just immediately like that was kind of my response, which um which is interesting, right? Because holiness. So, we're going to pause that story. It comes back into play. So, one thing that my dad mentioned in class today, or yesterday rather, was that holiness, the same root word for holiness is the same root word for wholeness. And wholeness is my jam. I care less about trying to like follow all of the rules full of the rules that people normally today assimilate and think about when it comes to holiness. But wholeness, like I love the idea of trying to become fully healed, fully whole, fully integrated in our current life. I think that that's like the point of life is to live it to the fullest. And so I really tuned into that. I was like, oh, I never really thought about holiness and wholeness being kind of the same core word. So that is kind of what we're exploring today. So Carl Jung is a Swiss, sorry, he was also cis, a cis male, um, was a Swiss psychoanalyst. And if like, I'm sure you've heard of him, but if not, just go listen to all of his stuff. It's fascinating. One of the things that he talks about is individuation. And what individuation is the process that all young adults go through or all children go through as they become adults to learn about themselves, right? So one of his main arguments is that we all have a shadow, and the shadow are the things that we don't necessarily like about ourselves, and so we just put them in the corner. The problem is that the shadow doesn't just go away. It actually, the more we suppress it, the more we push it away from our sight, it generally comes back to bite us in the butt, and we project that out onto the world, or we project that and we see people that way, and it's really just because of a suppression of the parts of ourselves that we don't really like. So he argues that like the best thing that one can do in their life is become obsessed with self, not in a narcissistic way, but in a way of bringing those shadows into the light, right? Like looking at it, facing it head on, and integrating those parts of ourselves that we don't love back into wholeness. With that being the goal of healing and wholeness. So again, you can kind of live the most fulfilling life. And that takes work, right? So that starts my theory of, oh, maybe holiness is less about kind of the construct that we think about it today, and more so potentially wholeness and maybe even freedom, right? So did some research, wanted to like look back and get in the ancient Jews' mind of the point of holiness. So in the original Hebrew, the word, I don't know, kadosh, something like that. That's probably wrong. But meant set apart, right? So they were given a set of rules to kind of follow, rituals that they started to enact within their everyday life because they wanted to be able to get in closer proximity to God. Because of cosmic physics, if you go too close to God, you just burn up, right? And so they had these holiness like laws that if they believed that they followed them, then they would be able to get closer proximity to God. And that was kind of the old covenant, the old understanding of the law. And it was very legalistic, right? And so it's kind of interesting. You can kind of parallel that to today when you look at like purity culture, right? There's a lot of things that that are just legalistic. Like you follow this because you're a good Christian, regardless of if it's a true representation of self or not. It's what we do, right? And sometimes there's a lot of shame that gets correlated from with that, and people get hurt from those types of issues within the church all of the time. So I was thinking about that, and I was driving here today, and I was listening to one of my podcasters that I love, Kelly Brogan. So Kelly Brogan, oh, she's so cool. She is a psychiatrist who went through kind of a transformation of just like regular psychiatry into a more holistic psychiatry. And she's kind of like really embraces like the femme fatale, the like dark feminine. She's awesome. But they were having a conversation about why most people fail trying to stop their alcohol addiction, right? Like, what's the missing piece in that recovery? And I have not finished listening to all of it, but what were some things I thought were really interesting when discussing it with this guy? I don't remember who he is. Sorry. Is that a lot of people, when they go through trying to um, recover and heal from this alcohol addiction, is they kind of just like white knuckle it, right? They're just like, I'm making a decision and I'm just going to force myself into trying to behave in this different way. And what she said was that stops and it halts a lot of the life force energy. And I thought that was very comparative to like purity culture and this holiness in the way that we kind of think about it right now, right? It's like we're just white knuckling it, like we're just doing these things because Like, that's what we were told, and there's probably a ton of value there. There's probably a ton of value there, but that's not what we are thinking about when we don't drink alcohol, right? It's just like, this is the thing that you're supposed to do to make sure you are pure and you are holy. End of story, right? And so I thought that it was really interesting that alcohol was kind of the example in this case, and I kind of want to explore it further. So this guy, he talked about how one of the reasons why people go to different coping mechanisms, specifically alcohol, drugs, those types of things, is because we're uncomfortable sitting with self. That's not a new revelation that he has come up with. It's something that even my mom, my Christian mom, right, would always say that, like, you're just like, when you get drunk, when you get high, when you do these things, you're just trying to escape yourself. And um and and the opposite of that, right, is sitting with self, is starting to accept all parts of self, getting back into that shadow work, right? And when you get into that wholeness, when you're able to bring those parts that you've been trying to separate yourself from, um, then you are free, the end goal, free from that coping mechanism, right? So the first kind of person that talks about this, and I don't really think that not the first person, but like biblically, that starts to use this different type of language other than just like follow the law, right, is Paul. And I don't really think of Paul, I'm like, wow, he's such like a conscious, aware speaker. But after kind of looking back at things from this perspective, I kind of see it a little bit differently. So I kind of want to keep using the example of alcohol. And I know I'm kind of all over the place, but just hang on with me. So after listening to this podcast, right, I pause it and I'm like, this reminds me of a really old video that I watched once. It was like this Russian girl, and she was like, alcohol is more than just like an elixir, right? She's like, it separates you from self, like from your soul, right? And I'm, whoa. And it was kind of the same thing with like the pig thing, right? Like, I don't really get that. I don't really fully understand it, but it makes me want to like look into it and stop drinking as much alcohol, you know? And so, I looked it up after I was listening to this podcast, and there's a Russian Orthodox understanding that alcohol is the destroyer of wholeness. And like, if you break it down epistemologically, it changes, right? And if you think about it, like, it changes your perception, it changes your judgment. People always say like, oh, when I was drunk, it wasn't me, right? Like, it does have some type of disassociative fragmentation of self as kind of a part of partaking in it. And quite literally, neurobiologically, it decreases our prefrontal cortex ability to think and increases our reactivity and our emotions. And when you react rather than respond, it's like, we are not in a state of consciousness, right? We are just like beings. We're just doing, running around, having no awareness of what's going on. And it's a disassociation. Like, it's a fragment of self. And it's the opposite kind of what we're working towards in trying to create wholeness. And so it's interesting. Like, I never really thought about that. So I go back to Paul, right? And Paul talks about, he says, be sober minded, be watchful. And prior to today, I kind of always thought of that as the same holiness thing, right? It's like, just don't do this because it's not like God, like, it's not godly, and you don't have a lot of, like, it separates your proximity to God. But now I'm thinking like, maybe it's less about puritanical control and more about like its consciousness language. Like, you have to actually be aware. And you can't be when you are numbing your senses and your sensibilities with this thing, right? So Osho wrote a book called Awareness, and I have it here. And his kind of like main takeaway in all of this is that awareness is necessary for wholeness. And that's what we're trying to get to, right? Wholeness and healing, and that's the name of the game here, at least the things that I'm the most excited about. So I want to read a couple of lines from this page. He says, and when you act moment to moment out of your awareness and watchfulness, great intelligence arises. Let me keep going. A man of awareness responds. He is responsible, literally. So something else that is not a new idea, but this guy on this podcast with Kelly Brogan talked about, is that there is a really powerful difference between reacting to something and responding to something, right? Reaction is we are not aware, we are not conscious, we are just quite literally mammalian brain, right? Reacting. And when we are in that state with less consciousness and awareness, like we are more easily controlled. So kind of a cool thought experiment that I kind of want to explore here is, if you aren't aware, then you are not choosing. So you are being run. And it's, I'm not trying to put any like major implications behind this, but it's just something that like think about, right? Like if I'm not consciously aware and instead I'm kind of just, like we talked about last week, consuming all of these things, and instead I'm being ran by the culture, or I'm being ran by the belief systems of my family, or I'm being ran by just kind of the things that I was told. In order to ever get to wholeness, I have to be at least aware of the things that are running me. And instead of just reacting to those things, I would much rather be responding to those things. And so, so there's some type of dynamic between like the more whole we are, the more that we work on this becoming as close to wholeness as we can, and the less reactive we are and the more responsive we become, the less manipulated we are able to be. Thus, a little bit more free, especially free from the coping mechanisms that we were kind of talking about earlier. So, one thing that's kind of interesting is they've done a lot of research to find out that 90% of what we do on a daily basis is just like habitual. We are only actively conscious of 10% of our thoughts and actions. The rest of it, like I said, habits. Someone who really talks about this is Bob Proctor. You guys know Bob Proctor? He's the secret guy, right? The law of attraction. And kind of his argument is that if we can start to change that 90% and retrain our habits by retraining our thinking and our actions, then we kind of retrain the outcome that comes from it. And so, so I think it's interesting to hear just like straight out, like only 10% of what you are doing every day, you are consciously choosing. The 90%, you're just out there doing it without even thinking about it. Like this is something that I do because like once I learned about this, I was like, I'm going to try to increase that percentage. I'm going to try to increase it to 11% and 12% and so on. So, how many of you guys drive to work the exact same way every single day? Or drive home, right? Not me. My town that I live in is pretty much just a rectangle of rows and rows and rows of streets that are all named after trees, and that's it. And then you pop out the other end. So you can go either this way, or what I have done is I've gone down every single street, and I even tried to actively like figure out and be aware enough of when I'm driving down the street, if I don't know what the street name is, I can find an indicator to try to figure out what street I'm on without knowing the street, right? Like that's where I'm trying to get to now. I even wrote down all of them once because there was like this weird, like you guys have seen those giant skeleton things? like they're like 10-foot tall skeletons. Well, like I saw in my mind like statistically too many in my neighborhood. And I'm like, why are there so many of these skeleton things? And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to drive through and see how many I can count in the entire neighborhood. And so I drove through to try to see who had the most skeletons. I did the same thing for American flags. I was like, I want to know what tree street is the most patriotic. Ironically, it's Victory Tree. You guys are curious. Okay, sorry, tangent. The point is that we are habitual beings and we will just do the same thing over and over because it's what makes us feel safe. The problem is that means that we are lacking awareness of that, and what is habitual and we're not conscious of, then it's kind of controllable. So increasing your just overall daily awareness of the things that you think, the things that you do, and then eventually your outcome in the future. Okay, so that we can explore further. It's fascinating. I'm not prepped for all of that quite yet, but I want to go back to holiness, and I want to go back to like what the man said himself, Jesus Christ. What did Jesus Christ say in regards to holiness? Mark 7:15 through 19. Here's the backstory. So, hanging out with his boys, the disciples, and the Pharisees, which were the religious Jewish oligarchs of the time. That might not be the best word. The priestly class. They start giving Jesus and his boys a really hard time because they did not do the ritual hand washing. Okay? They did not do the ritual hand washing, and Jesus was pissed about it. He was like calling them hypocrites, all these things. Here we go. So, what does Jesus think about holiness? Is it a set of things that we need to do in order to be like God, to be more godly, to be able to be in his presence? Or is it something else? Is it maybe more about wholeness, right? Like, what does the man say? Here we go. All of you listen and try to understand. It's not what goes into your body that defiles you. You are defiled but by what comes from your heart. We love him. And then he added, it is what comes from inside you that defiles you. So, less about what rituals we do, how we perceive ourselves to the world to make us look holy, but more so about what comes from our heart on the outside, from the inside out, right? Leaning towards inner integrity. But guess what? The verse that I just read is Mark 7:19, the one from the very beginning that may have been added in later on. What are the odds? What are the odds? I went through my whole day, started off with that nonsense, and then came back at the end of the day. Let's read 7:19, because this is the declaring, like this is like, and he declared, right? And he declared that every kind of food is acceptable in God's eyes. Right? It's no longer about having to keep everything pure going into our bodies, but instead being an integrous with self. 1 Corinthians 10:23, I am allowed to do anything. It does not mean that everything is beneficial. What am I saying? If holiness is bringing you more towards fragmentation, towards showing what, believing one way and acting another way, or portraying a part of yourself that is not true to be accepted by other people in the church. So you look more like God, but it's not in reality to who you actually are. Then that, my friend, is the opposite of holiness. It's fragmenting self, where in reality, we are looking towards wholeness. We are bringing all of those parts into the light and accepting, and as Kelly Brogan actually likes to say, alchemizing all of those parts to become whole. And that is what is most important, because that is what comes out of our heart. So when God says, and God, I'm pretty sure like this is God, I am holy, and so you should be holy. Maybe it's less about our proximity to looking like godliness and more so in our ability to become whole. Because when we are whole, we are free. Peace.